Let's discuss all these developments now with Sahar Khamis, a senior non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, live from Washington. Sahar, good to have you back on Al Jazeera. So you were listening there to this news conference from the Israeli War Cabinet, and the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying, interestingly there, that they will continue fighting until they win. And he said that, you know, Israel will do nothing, would stop Israel, including international pressure. Nothing will stop Israel, including international pressure. How will the Biden administration, which has expressed recently concern about the direction the war is taking, how will they be viewing this statement by the Israeli Prime Minister?
Thank you so much for having me back. I've been listening to the press conference, of course, and I didn't hear anything new coming out of Netanyahu's press conference and his war cabinet. It's pretty much more of the same, being resilient and determined on just continuing what is going on, the same course of action, more escalation of the ongoing aggression on Gaza, no backing down, no going back, no attempt to try to change the course of action in any way, shape, or form, which is really kind of alarming because we know that the United States lately has had a different stance from the Israeli government. We are seeing now some differences, some discrepancies between the Israeli and the American position on this issue surfacing in recent days and weeks. We have been hearing President Biden, Blinken, Jake Sullivan, who's been visiting the region for the second time and has had talks with Netanyahu and his war cabinet. We've seen a different tone from the American administration saying, hey, we need to really wrap up this Gaza operation sooner rather than later. And Netanyahu and his cabinet doesn't seem to have an appetite for that. They're talking about a much longer range of time. They're talking about extended fighting and shooting and bombardment of Gaza, possibly over few months, as they put it. And this is not something that the Biden administration is very happy about. Not to mention other things as well that have been brought up by the Biden administration, such as, for example, the responsibility of the Israeli side to make sure that they safeguard the lives of innocent civilians and that they actually carry out what the Biden administration described as tactical and more careful operations that avoid civilian targets and only target Hamas. And that has not been something that the Israeli government has been doing. And I think the last incident of the killing of these captives, Israeli captives, proves that.
Yeah, and Netanyahu himself did admit that there was a divergence between Israel and the Americans right now. We've got the U.S. Defense Secretary heading to the region once again in the coming days. What is going to be his message now, do you think, to Israel? And, you know, what direction will this war take on? 71 days on now, and we hear the Israelis saying it'll be a long-term war and a continuous war. Where do you think it's headed?
I think that the American defense minister will have a certain message that he would like to carry on to the Israeli government, which is basically an extension of Biden administration's new directions for this particular conflict. The attempt to try to wrap up the conflict rather than extend the fighting for, as Netanyahu has been talking about it, few months. Let's remember that there's going to be the 2024 elections coming up soon in the United States. And the Biden administration has no appetite to see a long-term extended kind of fighting and war to add to already the many of the burdens and files is already dealing with, such as the situation in Ukraine, domestic issues, economic issues. It has so much on its plate, and it would like to see things being wrapped up quicker and sooner rather than later, which doesn't seem to be the position of the Israeli government as of now. Another very important point as well, of course, is going to be the hostage crisis and the ability to return back again to the negotiations table and possibly to have some kind of Qatar-mediated negotiations to make sure that the 130 remaining captives on Hamas side are released. Maybe the last incident of the shooting of these 3 Israeli captives by Israelis can be a motivator for the return back again to the negotiations table in order to release the remaining captives. And another very important point as well is making sure to contain this ongoing crisis and make sure it does not extend or expand to become a much larger, much bigger regional crisis that
Indeed.
might include other parties as well, such as Iran and Hezbollah.
Indeed, and there were questions about the situation in northern Israel along the border with southern Lebanon. As you said, Netanyahu hinted that negotiations could possibly resume to get more captives released. There was an interesting comment he made, and it's not the first time he's made it, of course. He said Israel did not want to commit the mistakes of the Oslo Agreement. What do you make of that? And where does this leave the two-state solutions that the Americans want to get back to?
I think that the current Israeli administration or government, which is the most, as we know, the most right-wing government in the history of Israel, really has no appetite for having a sovereign Palestinian state of any shape or form. And we have seen that even being said clearly in the press conference, right? There's no possibility of having a sovereign Palestinian state. And really, it's shocking the possibility of having a two-state solution. And that's another point of difference and disagreement between the Israeli and the American side, because Biden and his administration is now talking about returning to the path of the two-state solution in the post-war Gaza phase. Let's return back again to negotiations. Let's return back again to the peace process. Let's return back again to the two-state solution. Now, Netanyahu's government doesn't seem to be buying into this. It seems to be much more hardline than ever, much more determined even to have some kind of security presence in Gaza in the post-war phase, which is not something that the American administration is happy about. America is talking about some kind of return to Palestinian rule over Gaza under what it describes as, quote unquote, a renovated or re-envisioned Palestinian Authority, whatever that means. The details are not clear. And that's not something that Israel would like to see. They clearly said that they're not interested in seeing any form of Palestinian representation or authority or rule in Gaza, which means they may even return to some kind of short-term military occupation and military security presence in Gaza again. And that's not something that Biden and his administration are on board with.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sahar, for sharing your views with us. Sahar Khamis, Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, joining us there from Washington. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.